Yes. Okay, so we cast off, we go to Siracusa and Ortigia. Now, this is how you spell the names in Italian. In English, you will use a Y, I believe. Syracuse and Ortigia as well with a Y, but we'll stick to the Italian spelling. So, welcome everybody. I'm Mario Bernardi, and we'll do this. This is actually the second episode of the series Marvels of Sicily, which will end the next Sunday with the last tour, which will be the one of Taormina and Mount Etna. This is the map of Sicily. So we already seen Palermo. We've done a tour of the Sicilian island all around. And today we go to Siracusa here on the east coast, quite far south, to facing towards Malta is just down there somewhere. Let's check on Google Earth as well, because you can see the Siracusa has a very peculiar appendix. So today and also back in the Greek times, the city expanded all the way, all the way in the mainland in a very also wide area. And then there is this little island, which it's an island off, separated from the coast. It's connected today by two bridges, but it's been a separate island, and naturally called the island of Ortigia, which is still part of Siracusa, is one of the oldest part, but was somehow kind of considered a separate entity. And it's the entrance to this wonderful bay with these wonderful colors. That's a port, of course, and right at the top, at the tip, there's the Castello Maniace, which is the main fort built in the 13th century. The city was founded as Syracuse by the Corinthian by the Corinthian Greeks. And if we go back, yes, on the slideshow, the city having this peculiar shape, there's the island with a kind of prolonged part ended up with the fortification of the castle. Then at the back, the mainland is quite high, and also all the area has the Neapolis, the Greek ruins of the city. Before the Romans conquered the city, it had 31 kilometers, some 20 miles of walls protecting it. So it was a huge city. This is how Ortigia appears today, with like the small houses facing the bay of Siracusa. And then we are going to fly over to get kind of introduction. Of course, the city expanded a lot after the World War II, and most of the buildings that you see when I approach the city are actually modern buildings built in 1960s, 1970s. Some of them are kind of ugly, but the city had preserved this look, especially in the old part, in the historic part, and it has a big archaeological area. It has catacombs, and of course, it's got this fantastic waterfront. So it's really a beautiful place if you, especially if you love to mix leisure and exploring the sea and going to the beach and history, culture, food. So it's really an incredible place. Compared to other cities, it's been preserved probably better, especially after the World War II, when modern cities being built mostly outside the old center. Now we will let me just get to the next one. This is how Ortigia, Syracuse, appeared about 200 years ago, 250 years ago. It was a highly fortified city, was a key important port. And of course, it was one of the main cities of this part of Eastern Sicily. It was under the Spanish rule from the 1400s up until the basically up until the King of Bourbon in the 18th century. So which was still part of a Spanish family, by the way, and was during those times that it was heavily fortified, all these fortification walls, and the castles were also refurbished, but it always had a military uh, defensive system, even during the Greek times. Now we'll see part of the Neapolis, the archaeological park, and the Pentapolis. There were like 5 cities all joined together under the walls of um, of Syracuse. They were called Agradina, Taike, the Neapolis, Epipolis, and then of course there was Ortigia that I already mentioned. All these form the city of Syracuse, all these little different areas, and that originally would have been different villages. This is the one of the coins which can be seen in the Archaeological Museum of Syracuse, dedicated to Paolo Orsi, who was an archaeologist who also excavated. The building is quite a modern building in Syracuse, and you could see the fish, this beautiful portrait of probably Artemis or another deity, and then Syracuse. So it's basically about Syracuse. In the museum, there are these are coins from Syracuse, gold coins, but below these are from Agragas, from Agrigento. And so it's very interesting to see the different coins in the museum. The museum, as I said, is a modern building. It has, of course, endless collection of archaeological findings, which are abundant in this area. And here also is on display this very famous statue of Venus, Venere Landolina, which was discovered at the beginning of 1800s. It's also known as Venere Pudica in Italian. It's a shy Venus because it's covering a nudity. And of course, she has a missing head, a missing arm, although it's a very graceful statue, which really enchanted the travelers during the 19th century, during the age of the Grand Tour, and can still be seen in the museum. The museum, of course, is also a display regarding the temples and the structure of the Neapolis, of both the Greeks and then the Roman towns. These are massive gargoyles from the top of the temples, which are on display in the museum. But let's start from the Latomie, which are basically natural caves, and the archaeological area of Neapolis is basically by these caves. You can see here there are actually cracks in the rock down here, and that's where there are these openings with these caves which were partially used and inhabited for a while. And this is all part of the archaeological park, which will require about half day to be seen. Here you could see there's the Greek theater, there's the Roman amphitheater, there's the Roman forum, and there's several other altars and also necropolis and tombs. So I'm going to do an overview now of this area. These are the grottos that in Italian we call them latomie that you would see. It's basically in the wall. There would have been the caves are natural, but there would have been also quarries here once. The most famous one is this one called the Ear of Dionysus. In 1608, Caravaggio, the famous Michelangelo Merisi, the famous Baroque painter from Milan, escaped from Malta when he was arrested after ending up in a fight with a knight. And after he escaped, he found hospitality in Syracuse when he had a connection. I'll mention this later because there's also a beautiful painting by Caravaggio in Siracusa. Anyway, according to tradition, while visiting this archaeological area, he named this grotto the Ear of Dionysus. If it's true, I don't know, but that's what they say when you go there. And also, story says that Dionysus, which was the the tyrant, the dictator of Syracuse, he basically used his peculiar grottos to be able to hear whispers from his guests. But of course, this as well. It's it's a story. The grottos are quite wide, and as I said, they were used as shelter originally, and also as a place for works. This is a painting that shows the preaching of St. Paul when he landed in Sicily, and then he started to find his way up to Rome. And this is the preaching, so of course the conversion of the Christian. And nearby there are the catacombs of Santa Lucia with several burials we're going to see. Up until not long ago, I think up until 1960s and 70s, there were in one of these grottos, the Cordari. In fact, there's one grotto called Grotta dei Cordari. The Cordari were the rope makers, corda in Italiano. And many city centers in Italy, including Rome, they have Via dei Cordari, Via dei Chiavari, Via dei Sediari. It's all because there were all these, crafts being done there. So this video is some maybe 80 years old, 90 years old, something like that. It would have been in the 50s, I think, this one. And so there were, of course, children working. Now there's nothing of that left there, but I think up until 1960s or 70s, they were still working in that cave. In other parts of Italy, people lived in caves up until 1970s, like in Naples, for example. Now, this is the map of the archaeological area of the Neapolis. There's also the Epipolis. There's several others, so it's quite a big complex. We concentrate on this one. This is where also the Roman part of the Roman town was, and the grottos are here. There's one of the grottos called l'Automia del Paradiso, the Grotto of the Paradise, and on one of the high grounds there is the Greek theater. Now, the difference between the Roman theaters and the Greek theaters is that the Greek theaters, they use the natural slope, and they actually carved inside the side of the hill, while Romans, they generally tend to build their theaters on a flat surface by using arches, like they did the amphitheaters. Anyway, in this case, the Greek theater, which was fundamental part of the Greek civilization, was also used then, of course, in the Roman times. When was originally the first settlement in Syracuse created? Well, there were already people since Bronze Age, but then in the 8th and 9th century BC, there was this colonization of southern Italy. The Greek society changed. The Greeks started to they started farming. Their cities got bigger. They needed more land. And Greece, if you've been to Greece, it's very rocky. There aren't very many open spaces where you can actually farm, and so there was a mass emigration from mainland Greece and from the Greek islands towards both east, west, south. They went to look for land from Asia Minor to southern Italy. Southern Italy was particularly appealing to them because it was somehow similar to Greece, but had big lands, large fields. In fact, they call it megas hellas, the big Greece, Magna Graecia in Latin. So the Greek civilization was not a unified state. They were independent city-states, very often at war with each other. This one was created by Corinthians, while other cities were created by Spartans, by Athenians, and so on. And in fact, they were at war with each other for some time, although at some point Syracuse and Agrigento, for example, formed an alliance. They weren't the only people there. There were the native Sicilians and the Sicani, the different ethnic groups living in Sicily. There were the Limi in the west part, and then there were also the Carthagines, which came from Northern Africa. So there were a lot of other people. Finally, in 212 BC, the Romans arrived, and of course, they conquered entirely the city. The original foundation of Syracuse dates back to 734-33 before Christ, so around the same time as the foundation of Rome. And the city thrived, became very big and very famous. It was also home to several philosophers, intellectuals, artists, poets, as was all Sicily and southern Italy. This is another viewing of the theater. This is some of the grottos that you could see from around there, including several tombs and several tombs and burials. I will elaborate it further. Now, some time ago, some video modeling, video reconstruction of the buildings of Syracuse were made. This one, it's about the theater I just mentioned, which was pretty big. It could host, I think, 30,000 spectators or so. So it's quite big. No, maybe less, maybe 12, 15 or 20,000, I'm not sure. And then you can see the passages underground, which were used by the actors to actually go on the orchestra. And then here you can see a well for, offerings and stuff. And then the this Hierone, which was one of the tyrants of Syracuse. The tyrants were basically the rulers of the ancient Greek cities. They alternated the period of democracy with periods of dictatorship. And then you could see the names and the dedications in Greek lettering on the seats, and it had pretty much the classic radial shape of the seats carved in the rock. So these were not clad with marble, were just carved in the rock. Okay, from here. Yes, this is how the 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 scene looked like at the bottom, like a beautiful facade with painted details and colored parts. And this is some of the framing, or the detail of the framing, which was made in a way that could be basically could be used some cladding in order to get some nails and some stuff in order to be put in place. On the top, there are some cranes. These were used for a popular element in Greek theater called the Deus Ex Machina. You see those cranes up there. So an actor was actually lifted down with wings or some sort of, and would solve the intricate and complex plot of the tragedy or the comedy. At some point, it became so intricate that it needed an external intervention. These are the telamoni, which are basically sculptures in the shape of a woman or the shape of giants that support. And then this is the trap from which the actors could actually pop up from underneath the floor. We saw the grooves before, and so this was quite an effect. If you can think of like 5th century, 4th century BC, you could still see the grooves left by those tunnels. Similar tunneling was then used later on in the Roman amphitheaters, for example. So something that the Greeks had already, and then the Romans also used in for their shows. And this is the crane for the Deus Ex Machina, which was basically left down. And at the end, when the plot got to a point where it couldn't be solved further, this god from a machine, because it was a god, but actually was pulled down by a crane, would come and solve any unresolved situation in the show. It's still used today in certain situations. Now we need a machina. You need a third party, an external intervention to solve the situation. The theater is still used today for concerts and shows. They have a summer festival every year. They do also ancient Greek shows, sometimes in Italian, sometimes in Greek, sometimes in Sicilian. And right outside, between the theater and the amphitheater, the double theater, the Roman one, there is a 200 meters long altar. Yes, it's 200 meters long. It's about 800 feet long. And it's the altar of Hieron II, Hierone, which was another dictator of Syracuse. And it was a giant long altar to have sacrifice of bulls. I think 400 bulls or so could be sacrificed at the same time. Usually the hecatombe, the sacrifice of 100 bulls or more, was considered the highest honor to the gods, and they really wanted to do it big. And next door, there's the Roman amphitheater, which was built around the 1st century after the Roman conquest. Of course, the Romans they did very little with Greek theater and tragedies. They had comedies, that different shows. Romans also had authors who wrote tragedies, but the big show was, of course, the gladiator fights. Now we still like it today because, for example, um, there are there are still people watching gladiator fights today. There's the Gladiator movie, the Gladiator 2 movie now is out, so there's a kind of very interesting attention to that today. The amphitheater, is similar to the many other amphitheaters built all over the Roman Empire as well. This one has a small underground area, so the animals and gladiators could come from up there. There would have been boarded floors there that would open, like in the theater. And of course, the seats are partially preserved. It has the classical, um, um, the classical oval shape right here. So then here, this is the amphitheater. There was at the entrance also here, maybe this we could see better from the Arch of Augustus. Right here, that's the floor level. And then if we go on the other side, there's also tombs. And amongst them, this the theater right here, down here. Down here, this part here. There's tombs and there's a road carved into the rock. The both like the mostly Christian tombs. This one were made after this place was abandoned. But among them, there's also one which I think is on the other side, maybe. These are the grottos. This is the grottos Latomia. Amongst them, there's one which is believed to be the tomb of Archimedes, which was, I can't find it here. So it was right here on the other angle. And so these are more tombs here. Right here, amongst them, there's one. I have a picture so you can see it better. There's one considered the tomb of Archimedes, although it wasn't probably that one. And it's this one here with the carving. This was already in a state of disrepair at the time when Cicero, the famous Roman philosopher of the first century, visited the site. And Cicero basically would pay by his pocket the restoration of the tomb of the great scientist Archimedes. Archimedes had been killed in 212 BC during the attack when the Romans took the city and defeated the Syracusans. And there's here, for example, 19th century painting to see the scientist like doing his calculation and stuff while a Roman soldier was stabbing him. He had been using, for example, concave mirrors to create basically a laser beam to burn the Roman ship. So the Romans really wanted to get rid of the guy. There is a modern statue which was made not many years ago, right in front of the bridges that connect Ortigia with the mainland, of the scientist here, Archimedes statue right there, so the city still remembers him. Not far from the right up here, not far from the the archaeological area, there are the catacombs, which are here. This is a modern building, the Santuario Madonna of the Lacrime, Madonna of the Tears. In 1953, a Sicilian couple living in Siracusa had an image of Mary that started to cry. Over 100 people saw it. And so they decided to keep this image in the church. The church was built in 1950s, 1960s, and in 1990s, the church was open. It's very peculiar. I don't really like it much, but it's really impressive also from the inside. And next door, there is the Archaeological Museum that I showed you before. Again, it's a very modern building. It looks like a kind of spaceship here. You can see it's this one here. And then towards the sea, there is the Santuario di Santa Lucia al Sepolcro. This is the place where, according to the tradition, the body of Santa Lucia would have been. Santa Lucia's body was then taken by the Venetian, and it's actually in the city of Venice, in the Campo San Geremia, because the church of Santa Lucia, where originally the remains were, was destroyed in the 19th century. And so the remains are in a different church, but in Venice. But here is where she originally was martyrdom in the late 3rd century. And then there's a church here dedicated to her. The church, which was built during the Norman period, so in the 12th, 13th century, that's where originally the painting by Caravaggio was made for on the main altar. The painting had been moved to the Museum of Modern Art in Siracusa. Then it had been restored, and finally it's been displayed in the church where it belongs. This is the church here, and on the altar down there, there is the Caravaggio painting. They've removed that back in the 70s, and then because after the other Caravaggio was stolen, because this church had no alarm or nothing, they were in locked at night. So now the original is back in the original location. And nearby, I will talk more about Caravaggio. This is the tomb, which, as you can see, it's actually on a lower level than the street level. And nearby there are the catacombs, which are, pretty big, and they are now, there's only a small part open to the public, but in the past they've been all open to the sorry, what happened? Yes. So these are the catacombs, also with paintings, with frescoes, images of saints. The corridors are like similar to other catacombs which are present in Naples, in Rome, in other parts of Italy. They are basically carved into the rock with the allocation for the bodies on the sides. They were wrapped in a shroud and closed with clay or with tiles or with marble slabs with the names, and sometimes with Christian symbols. And it's quite something. I visited these catacombs many, many years ago, but it's always a very important experience to be able to do so. This is the church of Santa Lucia al Sepolcro. It's a Norman church. And this is the painting. Now, Caravaggio, he had to escape from Rome because of the murder of another man, and during kind of a riot. And then he went down to Naples, and then from Naples ended up in Malta, and then from Malta had to go back to Sicily to escape and trying to get back to Rome, where he never arrived. In Sicily, he had a friend, which is this Vincenzo Mirambella and Mario Minniti. Minniti had worked with him in Rome. They work in the same workshop, in the workshop of a painter called Lorenzo Siciliano. And it was in this workshop that he met connection with them. So he was introduced to Vincenzo Mirabella, which was a very important historian at that time. And he is probably the one who showed him the archaeological area, introduced him to the Senate of the city of Syracuse, and he was then able to get the job. The man, it can be probably seen here. There's a figure here, a little forehead. I think it's him. You can see here on the right, next to the hand. This would be his friend, next right to the bishop. So there is a really a connection that he had there in order to be able to paint such a large painting. This is the first one he made in Sicily, and then he made another one in Messina and then Palermo. And it was running at the time, it was a fugitive, but even though that is so intense, it's a beautiful painting. You have the body of Santa Lucia on the floor, which has no halo, no aura, it's just a corpse right at the entrance of the catacombs where she was buried. So they just bury here and there. So you can see the two men digging up, and then you can see the group of people mourning her at the back. It's really an incredible masterpiece with these bare walls, which gives this illustration of death. And that's the body of the saint there. There's a shell here, symbol of the pilgrimage, and you can see the body of her right down there on the floor like a corpse with no rays of lights, no angels, no nothing. It's really an incredibly strong painting. After the restoration, was originally in another church as well, which is this one here, which is not far from the cathedral, right in the center of Syracuse. And then we go back to Ortigia. So this is the archaeological area that we saw the pack. We go now to Ortigia, where there are some incredible temples there, including, for example, here you can see the Temple of Apollo, which was probably the first temple built here in the 6th century BC. And the second one was then the temple to Artemis, and there was also temple to Zeus, and also a temple to Athena. And Athena and Artemisa, which are next to each other. This one is not in very good state, but you can still see the columns and everything else. The Sicilians, they call it the two columns because the only thing you could see there down there at the corner, the two columns still standing. Now, from here, let me just get. We are flying over now the city center. This is the cathedral dedicated to the Nativity of Mary. And the cathedral was actually built on the temple of Athena, right, reusing the columns. Now, after the collapse of the Roman Empire, of course, the Goths invaded Italy, but then the Byzantine in the 6th century managed to reconquest southern Italy and central Italy. And so for up until the conquest by the Arabs, for about 200, 250 years, the Byzantines, from Constantinople, they kept the city. And so the temples were turned into churches. This one was done by the Byzantines later on. After the Arabs took the city, in the 11th century, the Byzantine and then the Normans, freed the city from the Arabs. But this one was already conquered by the Byzantines, which struggled to get, past and over the Arabs. That's why the Byzantines hired the Normans as higher swords in order to help them with the war. And then the Normans discovered how beautiful Sicily was and decided to move down south and conquer all of southern Italy and Sicily as well. And this is the castle named after Giorgio Maniace, which was the general of the Byzantine fleet, the Grand Admiral, the head in chief of the Byzantine army and naval forces. He was the one who took the city. This castle was actually not built by him, was built by the Frederick II Hohenstaufen, so by the House of Svevi. And they are the dynasty that came after the Normans in the 1200s, but he named that after Maniace, out of respect for the great Byzantine general. So it's very unique to Sicily, this generally to southern Italy, this fact that you have, especially to Sicily, because you have the Greeks, the Phoenicians, the Carthaginians, the Romans, and then you have the Arabs, which stayed over 200 years. Then you have the Byzantines, then you have the Normans, then you have the Germans, the Svevi, the Hohenstaufen, and then you have the French, the Danjou, then you have the Spaniards. So all these different civilizations all like left something. They took something, but also left something in this land. The thing that they left with Sicilians is the fact that the Sicilians have respect for no authority, no power whatsoever. So that's something that you could see if you get there. Now, so this is the temple of Apollo, I already mentioned. Now, there are other ruins, other temples right underneath the main square. If we go back now here with this to the main square on the Duomo, which I can do. Can I do it? Yes. Back. Okay. So we move down to Ortigia. And right here, there is the yes, there's the cathedral, there's the palace of the archbishop, there's the Palazzo Vermexio, which is a beautiful Baroque palace. It's really incredible. And underneath here, right, there's the excavations that have the temples one next to each other. If you, yeah, right here. Right, underneath here, there's more excavation, this modern part here, where they found the remains of a convent, and beneath that, the Artemision, the temple to Artemis. While this columns here in the outside wall in the cathedral and inside the cathedral are actually the columns of the temple of Athena, which was the 6th century BC, which was then transformed into a church by the Byzantines. So it's incredible that you have all this history kind of transforming and permeating this area. Now, the underground excavation on the Palazzo Vermexio is very interesting. They also found this, which was basically a place where they put the bodies to dry, basically to get all the liquids off the bodies. That's what they look like, toilets, but they were not. They were just like a place where the bodies were put there. It's called putridarium in Latin. It was something where the bodies were just put there to dry for a few weeks or months, and then eventually they would turn into mummies. These are the two temples that once stood there next to each other, the temple of Athena and the temple of the Artemision, temple of Artemisia, and they're basically underneath. One is here, the other one, the foundation in the other one. I'll show you again now the modeling of how the temples would look like back in the day. Going down to the center, do you see there will be overlapping, we'll be seeing. Now, this is the first one, the oikos. This is during the foundation, 8th century. Oikos means home or environment. And this would have been one of the first sacred places in the 8th century, 7th century. Later on in the 6th century, 6th to the 5th century, the Artemision and the Temple of Athena were built. There are these two temples here. I think the speed is a bit fast. No, it's not fast. It's just a normal thing. And so these are the facade. Of course, they would have been colored. They would have had statues on top of which were fragments. Those lion heads that are in the museum. This goes a bit fast. The one on the left is the Temple of Athena. The one on the right is the Ionic temple, or the Temple of Athena is Doric. And this is the other one is the temple. This is the Doric again, and it's the temple of Apollo. This is just like the promo. It's interesting. It has. Let me just see if we can. Yes. Okay. So the temples would have had an altar outside for the sacrifices, and then he would have had decoration on the top called acroteri. This is the cell room, and of course the roof and the roofs were made of wooden beams tiled. And that's why roofs, and they're never preserved. The columns, the walls, they're very often preserved. Everything else is not. And this is some of the elements we already saw. Okay, let's go forward. This is how that's how the cathedral looks today. It's wonderful space, this wonderful square. That's the facade of the cathedral, which was redone then in the late 1600s, early 1700s. In 1693, there was an earthquake that damaged and destroyed a lot of buildings, so many buildings were refurbished or even rebuilt. And that is the bishop, the diocese palace, the Palazzo of the Bishop. And on the left, the Palazzo Vermexio, this one here, which was a perfect, like, cube, but then transformation were made. During the 20th century. In the 1960s, a top floor was built, was added, which made it kind of ugly. Anyway, inside the cathedral, right here, let me see if we can get inside. There are these amazing columns still preserved inside. And this is the wall of the cellar that's been transformed, of the central room that's been transformed into, to be used as a church. It's really, really incredible. This, of course, there's an altar to Santa Lucia and so on. Let me see if I can. This is the facade. So with the light, with the blue sky, it's really incredible. Now, from here, so this is the beautiful Doric columns. Next door in the Palace of Diocese, there is the library of the diocese, which is very, very interesting, and it can also be visited. And this is the Palazzo Vermexio, which has the coat of arms of the Spanish Empire up there, of the House of Habsburg, Charles V, during the 1500s. And today is the municipality of Syracuse. So you can see the flag of Sicily and the Italian flag, the European Union, and the city of Siracusa. That is, the Spanish emblem, and then there are the two columns with plus ultra. After they after they have discovered the Americas, of course, that became the emblem that they went past Gibraltar, where there was the columns placed by Hercules according to mythology. So plus ultra means go beyond, and that was the motto of the Spaniards in the Renaissance and after. There are a few other beautiful palaces from the 18th century and up to the 20th century. Syracuse really has beautiful mansions where the nobility lived. There's some beautiful, incredible mansions. Like, for example, this is the corner of Palazzo Vermexio, which is a lizard, which actually it was a nickname of the architect who designed the palace. So basically, it was kind of a little joke put there. And this is the palace of the clock right opposite there. In the more modern part of the city, there is also a fountain dedicated to Artemis right here. This is the early 20th century. And you can see the features of the 20th century fountain. If we get back on so we move. So the fountain of Diana, Artemis, it's here, right in the center. And that's a palace with a clock, which again is early 20th century. The square is dedicated to Archimede. So just down the road from the cathedral. And then there are the bridges here. But that's where the statue of Archimedes is as well, the one that we saw before. And then there's the castle. So this is the Castello Maniace, which actually, as I said, was built in 1200s by Frederick. And there are several other military architectures in Italy. The most famous is Castel del Monte. and they're really incredibly beautiful. The geometry, the architecture, the construction technique, it's really incredible. And this is the inside of the Castello Maniace. This is the castle that is right here at the end, this one here. Let's go outside first. No, we're going inside. So these are the beautiful, look how beautiful, it looks like a cathedral than rather than a castle. And this black and white alternates is just because these are metal bars, metal rings just put there in order so the columns doesn't break up, and so this has been done to the central pillars. Otherwise, they would be naturally white. But these ribs here on the ceiling, and they're beautiful. These cross ceilings. That this is the inside of the Castello Maniace. That's a night, is beautiful views, is all very well lit up. It's not the only castle. There is another huge fortified area right on the mainland. It's the that is the other castle, Castello Urialo is called, and this was built back in the Greek times, at the in the in the area of Epipoli, and he had several walls, and there were several towers. It was really, really difficult to take, and he had several moats, 3 of them actually. So it was really designed in a way that it could not be taken. If we get back on the Google Earth, yes. So this is way back from where we were in a higher part, and still today is perfectly preserved. It's quite big, and it's right on the top of this kind of elevated rocks. It dominated the lands around and behind Siracusa and Ortigia, and still today it's quite impressive because the walls are very well preserved, and you can see the moats and all the different defensive structures. So it's really an impressive military structure still there. Of course, abandoned today, but you could see how big the entire ancient city was, because from there it went all the way down to the coast. This was the left today of the castle, and that's the view of Siracusa with the Mount Etna in the background with the snow on the top. Mount Etna is 3 kilometers, it's over 3 kilometers high, so it's 10,000 feet tall. And Ortigia also has a natural spring right by the sea, and it's the spring Arethusa. Arethusa was a nymph that then was transformed into a deity. It's one of the many mythological stories of transformation back in the Greek times. And
Non solo gli uccelli volano alti nel cielo per guardare.
let me just see this. There's a video here. So this is the documentary about the Fonte Arethusa.
Dal punto di vista architettonico, ha forma ovale.
So there was a natural grotto here, and then eventually a system like a walkway and a garden was created around it, so people could enjoy this natural spring, but it was open to the sea at some point. There was this natural spring water going right onto the sea, and it's a very peculiar environment. It's very, very famous, and it also has this papyruses growing there, and this is one of the only 2 or 3 places where papyruses grow in naturally, I mean, outside of Egypt. So it's very, very peculiar. I'll mention more about that later on. It doesn't really, yeah, this is a statue about Aretusa. And this is the view from the walkway around the spring. Now let's get back to the spring. So this is how the spring looked like 200 years ago, so 300 years ago. Then at the beginning of the 30th century, the ladies went down there to do the laundry to the spring. And then later on, they created this walkway around, so people could appreciate the spring from there. And the papyruses that really grow there, it was only, I think, in the 18th century that traveler discovered that this was actually papyruses. They were not used for making paper, although they've been, there since at least the Roman times or maybe earlier. And there's also near Catania, there's another place where the papyruses grow naturally. Now so this is the only papyrus place where you can find them in outside of Egypt, and there's also a museum. They make papyrus paper, so they really celebrate this unique feature. Now, Syracuse was also, of course, part of the World War II landing. This is the British troops landing nearby in a beach nearby Siracusa. And as in many other places in Italy, there is also war cemetery, which is here. And I can show you the war cemetery. It's a Commonwealth war cemetery for the Brits that made and the members of the Commonwealth that landed here. You see, the cemetery is similar to many other cemeteries, war cemeteries, with all the same tombs. And you can see here some of the pictures of the cemetery. Of course, you have some have the crosses, some have symbols. And in 1950s, Winston Churchill, the British Prime Minister, holidayed in Syracuse, and of course he visited the war cemetery. He really loved this area, and of course he paid his respect to the fallen. And these are the beautiful coast of Sicily, right around Syracuse. That's the beach of Vindicari. There's some beautiful places around there. That picture there, it's here, Santa Panagia, is this bay here, which is really incredible. Here, look at the color of the waters. This is the basically it's between the Ionic Sea and the Strait of Sicily. It's because of the streams, the waters are very clean, very, very beautiful. The coast is really, really incredible. There's also a tonnara, which is where they fished. It's abandoned like all the other ones, but that's how they fish the tuna by luring the tuna into a pool and then slaughtering them. And then, of course, down there's Ortigia, Siracusa, and the bay. Okay, so thank you very much for following today's tour again. And of course, I'll send the recording tomorrow. Next Sunday, it will be the December the 1st is already December. I will be doing Taormina and Mount Etna, which will be the last one of this series. And I apologize for having to change again the dates and everything. I hope you enjoyed this. And then I will be playing a short video. About 10 years ago, they lit it up at night, the grottos. And so there's the video of the drone at night with the grottos. Thank you very much, Joanna. Thank you very much. Buonanotte. Ciao, buonanotte.